Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com editor, frequent guest on the program. We figured the sky's not falling yet, Mike, but I like to at least point out if there are clouds in the sky and if there's rain in the clouds. Explain what what's happening here with the replacement officials that the league is going after or looking to employ.
Well, this is yet another labor dispute for the NFL. Year after the lockout, the officials are now locked out. And I think where this becomes a real problem, two things. First, the NFL expects the game officials now to be that front line of defense in the concussion fight, spotting the guys who maybe need to be checked out. The NFL added that burden to the officials last year. Well, okay, fine. If you're going to lock out the guys who are presumably the best of the best officials, and people complain, oh, get rid of them, they're terrible anyway. Well, guess what, folks? They're the best of the best. You start going to second best, third best, fourth best, fifth best, you're going to get it, and that's the problem. This isn't a matter of just tapping someone on the shoulder who does SEC games and say, come on up and be our replacement official, because you need those guys to commit. The SEC needs them to commit. The NFL needs them to commit. They show up on Saturdays. They spend time reviewing tape and learning the rules in between. It's not like they're going to do a college game one day and go do an NFL game the next day. So you're going to get guys who aren't the best college officials either. I don't know who you're going to get if you're the NFL trying to find these replacements. But in this era, with so much emphasis on safety, I think we have to assume we're not going to have the best officials on the field if this happens, and I think people need to be concerned about that.
Well, I'm also looking at this and saying it's June, just like I did last year when I said during the lockout it's June. At what point do you say, now I think we need to have a little bit more concern?
Week one, because this isn't anything like they have to show up for training camp, they have to do that. Week one. If they're not there week one when the real games start, then I think we need to be concerned. I think there should be some concern from a safety perspective in the preseason, because you still have guys hitting each other, guys who may need to come out of the game, whatever the case may be. But I wouldn't worry about any of this until week one. And I think what the NFL is doing is they're exerting the leverage they can and trying to get the officials to cave in and take what the NFL's offering, and they're showing, hey, we've got an alternative. May not be an ideal alternative, but we've got an alternative. The games will go on even if the officials are substandard.
What about full-time job for these officials?
Oh, I think it's a great idea, Dan. And as the game gets bigger and bigger, the outcomes are more important. The integrity of the game, we hear the commissioner talk about the integrity of the game. Well, okay, get full-time officials. Try to go from 98% of the calls right to 98.2%. It's still an improvement. Problem is it costs a lot of money. You got a guy like Ed Hockley practicing law in Arizona making, what lawyers make, and then throwing on top of that what he makes being an NFL referee. You got to give him a financial reason to give up that other job, and most of these officials have other jobs. So you got to pay them enough that they abandon the job they already have and they do this full time, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do with them 12 months out of the year. There's only so much you can do with a full-time official, but I think that it's moving in that direction. The commissioners talked about having a handful of full-time officials. I think they really need to consider it, because they need to create the sense they're doing everything they can to get every call right in every game.
He's Mike Florio from ProFootballTalk.com, joining us to the Dan Patrick Show. Justin Blackmon getting banged for a DUI. It seemed like there are more concerns about him as a football player, given what happened, in these workouts, at least from his head coach. Give me the full picture here with Justin Blackmon.
Well, this isn't the run-of-the-mill DUI. This is a .24 blood alcohol concentration. It's a lot of alcohol that he consumed before he got behind the wheel of the car. Who was he with? Where are his friends? Who was he out with? Well, I'd love to know more about the circumstances of how he ended up behind the wheel on Saturday night. And, we hear all the time about the fact that these guys have access. You dial the 800 number, they pick you up, no questions asked, they take you up. That'd be great to have something like, I'd pretend I was drunk if I could get a free ride home. They come pick you up and take care of you like that. Why don't they use this? Why don't the players take better advantage of this? And I think that's the message that you need to get out to every player coming into the NFL. Use that 800 number. When in doubt, take the ride home. And it's safe for you, it's safe for everyone else, and it keeps you out of trouble in your job. So I think the Jaguars really need to figure out how to help this kid, because when I hear a .24 and there's been a past incident, I just wonder whether or not there's a problem that it needs to be addressed.
You have the Saints bounty ledger now. And we have, little morsels of information that are so-called leaked out, but any further news on did they actually keep a book there that said this is what we'll pay you? And I think they called them whack hits.
And see, that's the problem. There's a book that details payments, but we don't know what the payments are for. And what the NFL does, they don't give the real evidence. They leak their characterization of the evidence. So we have to trust that their version of it is accurate. We don't see the raw data. We don't have a chance to really look at it and figure it out. And the thing that I'm still confused about, supposedly in a game between the Panthers and the Saints, November 2009, three $1,000 payments were made, presumably for a card off or a whack or whatever it is. Well, there weren't three members of the Panthers offense injured in that game. The only injury that I can see from that game was Thomas Davis, who plays defense for the Panthers. So I don't know what the $1,000 was for. And that's the kind of stuff you need in order to believe there really was a bounty system. Who was getting paid? How much were they getting paid? And what were they specifically getting paid for? And until we see that, we just don't know. And maybe there was a bounty system, but I don't think what came out on Friday is evidence that it existed.
Mark Sanchez has his Jets West passing camp. Does Tebow, from a PR perspective, have to go to that?
Oh, probably, because... Well, you know what? From a PR perspective, what he needs to do is stand up and say, Mark Sanchez is the starting quarterback of this team, and I wish anybody else out there who'd want to put up a billboard or clamor for me to be the quarterback would shut up. He's the starter. I'm the backup. I may play from time to time, but I fully support Mark Sanchez. So by going to this, he creates the impression he supports Sanchez, but until he says, I know my role, I'm the number two guy.
Wait, you're waiting. So it's up to Tebow. Why isn't it up to Rex Ryan to say, you know what?
But they've said it.
Okay, but does Tebow has to say this, that, hey, I'm not competing for this job, I'm a competitor, but it's his job, I'm here to help in any way?
Well, look, I don't know that a guy has to say that, but when you're looking for a backup quarterback, it always makes life easier when you get a backup quarterback who's willing to accept the fact that he's the backup. And I think the Jets knew what they were doing when they brought in a guy who doesn't see himself as a backup. And this all gets back to Mark Sanchez. What does it take to get him focused week in and week out, game in and game out, get him to play in the regular season like he plays in the postseason? That's what the Jets are trying to do. And Mark Brunell wasn't enough of a threat. Tim Tebow's enough of a threat. And the Jets win if this really does work and it makes Sanchez reach the limits of his abilities, whatever they may be.
But Tebow is not capable of saying that.
I know
that's not in his DNA. You can't bring a guy in and say, hey, Mark, you need to admit you're not going to be competing for this job, or it's Mark and I'm just here to help. That's just not how, he's the most, he'll be one of the more competitive guys the New York media has ever covered.
And that's why having Rex Ryan and Mike Tannenbaum and anyone else say Sanchez is a starter is meaningless. Tebow is coming for Sanchez, and once the real games start, if Sanchez struggles, see, the Jets have the perfect cover. They never have to say they bench Sanchez. They're just going with the Wildcat package for a while, and then they'll put Sanchez back in. It reminds me of what the Cardinals did 5 years ago with Matt Leinart. Whenever they'd fall behind by 7 or 10 points, they'd bring in Kurt Warner, and then they'd tie the game up, and then they'd put Leinart back in. They never benched Leinart. They got two quarterbacks. They're just using them. I think that's what we'll see from the Jets if and, I guess, when Sanchez struggles.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, see you, buddy.
Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com.